Hello, hello, and welcome to another Sunday Superversive live stream. I'm your host, Ben Wheeler, and I'm here today with just my co host, Anthony Marquetta. More or less to, just chat. Our vacation is coming up next week, and we'll be out for, 2 weeks or so, except for Saturday, since we'll both be on the road Sunday. So we're just, relaxing. I took a nap. Anthony, did you take a nap today?
I did not, but that's okay.
Wow. What does Anthony have against naps? I don't know. I don't even want to know. I don't know this man anymore. Oh, well. So, despite his nap racism, Anthony, we have a whole bunch of things to talk about video game storytelling. Storytelling. Elden Ring.
Yes.
I found a pebble that said that the Elden Beast landed upon it and immediately tripped over this pebble, and it is now a legendary weapon. Anthony, what does this mean? What does this mean, Anthony?
Never played Elden Ring. Here's my extent of my relationship with the Dark Souls, or the Soulsborne, I should say, franchise. I have played the first 5 minutes of Dark Souls, realized it was not for me, and then stopped. I went, yeah, no, I'm not gonna have fun with this game. And then I just stopped. Uh, I mean, like, I'll put it to you this way. Like, I've heard people compare Hollow Knight in some ways to Dark Souls. It's kind of weird. In terms of my taste in video games, you want to say, oh, he doesn't like hard games. But that's not entirely true because, like, FTL is a famously hard game. And I have, like, 2,000 hours in FTL. I love FTL. I'm not
Right.
good at it, but I love FTL. However, games like Hollow Knight, Dark Souls, not a fan. And not a fan, I like to think of myself as mature enough as a critic, reviewer, whatever, is not the same as saying it is not good. I certainly would not say that, just that they're not the style of game for me. I started Witcher. I played for like an hour and then I was like, it's not very hard, but I don't really get the combat.
Mm.
I may keep up with it just because so many people tell me, "Oh no, you got to keep up with it. It gets better." Uh, but it better get better fast.
Right. I get you. The I'm trying to think. Um. Oh my goodness. So, yeah, like I made a joke that's not a real item in Elden Ring. But it is sort of an example of storytelling in these games, where one can see, the barest hint of something, and sort of fill in your own ideas. And that's one brand of storytelling. I know, Anthony, you're very fond of Sly Cooper, Hades, and a few other things, that have very strong storytelling, not tied to sort of what the player picks up. And then, of course, there's more cinematic experiences. Rockstar Games is kind of the
Yep.
famous one. I know I just finished playing. The problem is that I organize my Steam folders, so it's like immediately I just forget the experience.
That's hilarious. My Steam folder is literally like I just have a library of games in alphabetical order. And then I go through it going, I wonder how long ago I bought this game. So here's something for all of the viewers to know. I just got a gaming laptop. I worked a summer job, made me some money. I'm not rich, like don't get me wrong. But I made some money and I said I have wanted a gaming laptop for literally years. There are games that I bought on Steam when they went on sale, that were like $40 games on sale for $5, which happens every now and then. And I would buy them knowing I couldn't play them under the pretense that one day I would have a laptop that was good enough. And now I do. It's a glorious experience.
Project Warlock. There we go. Uh, which has almost no storytelling. It's like Doom storytelling. There we go. That's what I was thinking about. It was not as enjoyable as everyone goes over, which made me sad.
So storytelling in video games is a very, very interesting topic. Uh, there are a lot of different things to consider. The first thing that I want to address, because it's honestly like kind of a tough. I think this is a genuinely difficult topic, like something I don't know the answer to off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
Havocbringer says, "Oh, hi there. Hey, Havocbringer."
Hey,
Uh,
Havoc
so, if you look at games as art, now J.D. Cohen has described art as anything produced to a standard is art, which would make video games by definition art. I am not sure how much I agree with that definition, for the very simple reason that that is not what people mean generally when they say art. So if you're talking about art and you're saying something that isn't what people mean, we're not talking about the same thing. Like, I get his point,
Yes.
and it's a good point, and I do agree that there is such a thing as an standard. We here at Superversive Sci-Fi believe in objective quality. Uh, we none of that, so beauty is in the eye of the beholder crap. But I do wonder if that's too reductive of a definition of art. So the problem with video games specifically is that anytime you look at things that are on the list of video games as art, it is always going to be a game with a focus on its story, or almost always. Either that or very, very strong, like, visual aesthetic qualities. Now,
Yeah.
you might say, well, naturally, but the problem is that there is this does not necessarily intersect with the greatest games ever made. Like, here's what I mean by that. If you were to make a Venn diagram of games with the best stories ever and the greatest games ever, there would be games that are among the greatest games ever that are not on the list of games with the best stories ever because they
Yep.
just don't care about the story. Like
Doom.
Doom, great example. Really great example, actually. There was another, like, I'm thinking basically any Mario game. Almost, I'm sure, I haven't played all of them. I'm sure there are exceptions. There are probably Mario games that did give a crap about the story. But for the most part, Mario doesn't really care about creating a consistent world with consistent lore. It cares about creating a colorful world and fun gameplay, right?
Right.
Like, and that is its priority. It's priority number one. And if you were to talk about the history of video games without talking about the Mario franchise, you would be doing a disservice.
Yep.
Like, it would not be complete. Uh, so, I guess what I'm saying is, you will never see, like, Doom, the Mario games, or whatever, on a list of, like, games as art. And I wonder if that's fair. Like, why not? In terms of, if you go by J.D. Cohen's definition of art, Doom is, in many ways, a perfect video game, right? It is a union of design and purpose and function, It knows exactly what it wants to do, and it does it nearly flawlessly. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
not even a huge Doom fan. Like, it's not my favorite game by any means. But it there is a reason that basically no first-person shooter has ever really made any sort of progression from Doom, right?
Right.
Like, because you can't. It's not even a criticism of these first-person shooters. Like,
Right.
there's nowhere you could go. Doom figured it out.
Yep, that's exactly right. A lot of the like Project Warlock, the thing I just played, is literally just Doom, except the character can do magic. The sprite works are amazing. The level design so. It's a really fun, solid experience. Does it do anything different than Doom or something that Doom would do if they had the tech? And by the way, Doom is a technical masterpiece because it literally broke so many things just wide open.
Yep.
No, it like if they thought that they could give Doom Guy magic, they would have given Doom Guy magic. And the proof is that after Doom, John Romero made like 15 magic. Oh, well, not 15. I exaggerate too much, but like 4 magic games. Where you had weapons and magic, the Hexen and Heretic series.
Here's an interesting thing, though. I mentioned that, like, Doom pretty much mastered, like, what makes an FPS, boiled it down to its essentials, distilled it to a fine point. Which means that the next great FPS, I think people would say, was probably Quake, and even Quake is kind of odd if you actually know anything about the history of Quake, which I do, because I watched Ahoy, if you know that channel, Retro Ahoy.
I'm
Awesome
more of a
channel, highly
Civi fan.
recommended. Haha. Now, Retro Ahoy's great though. He he did like a little documentary basically on the making of Quake, and you realize that the finished product version of Quake is actually way less ambitious than what they intended Quake to be, which is
Yep.
kind of interesting. And it's still considered a great game. Like, I'm not saying it's not, but like it was actually intended to be even more ambitious than that. But I think the next truly, really great one was considered to be Half-Life, the one that like brought the industry forward.
Yep.
However, this is where it gets interesting. Where, in what way did Half-Life improve upon Doom? Mechanically, pretty much not at all, right? Like, don't get me
Right.
wrong, Half-Life is a well-made FPS with good generally speaking, good level design. Uh, I haven't played the game in full, I've played part of it. I've heard the sewer levels aren't that great, and I heard that the alien world at the end is ambitious but not very well realized. Uh,
Sure.
However, overall, like the level design of Half-Life is said to be excellent, and which I'm sure it is.
So it's
Yeah.
more about the narrative changes in the
Exactly.
game than it
That's
is
where
the
I was
actual.
going with this.
Yeah.
So, where you talk about where Half-Life innovated on Doom, it was not in gameplay. Like, the gameplay of Half-Life was good, but fundamentally, it was just refinements on Doom. Right?
Right.
Ultimately. And to be fair, Doom did not arise in a vacuum or anything like that. I don't intend to say that it did. There were shooters before Doom. Wolfenstein 3D tends to be called the first FPS, and that might not be true, but you know, it's a fair game to pick as a starting point, right? Like
It's yeah.
Doom didn't arise out of the ether. Like it didn't just come out of nowhere. There was definitely a history it was building on.
Yeah. Like it so like the first one is some sort of weird tank game where like you're driving a tank through a thing and rescuing or killing things, and it looks interesting. It is super primitive. And I'm sure that there were a few other things, like Tron or whatever. But ultimately, Wolfenstein is the father, but Doom is the well, no, sorry. Wolfenstein is the grandfather, but Doom is the father of all FPSs.
Right, exactly. So when you go to Half-Life, mechanically, it's just refinements on Doom. That's not to say they're not good refinements. That's not to say that Half-Life has nothing to add, but ultimately, it's the same basic type of gameplay as Doom. Uh, where Half-Life differentiates itself, and what people to this day remember Half-Life 4, and this became the Valve brand. Like, this became what Valve was known for, was its storytelling. So,
Yep.
what was the innovation in storytelling that Half-Life was the first game to figure out? Well, Half-Life starts in media res. Like, you are started. Actually, sorry, scratch that. The opposite. Most video games started in media res. Half-Life does not. Half-Life starts before the story begins, where you're just living out a normal everyday day, correct?
Yep.
Am I remembering that right?
Yep.
But it is entirely first person. You are interacting with the game at every point, and that became the hallmark. And that's where I would point to when you talk about video game storytelling versus other mediums. Uh, if you want to tell a good story in a video game, there is really only one thing that differentiates video games from other mediums that can allow you to take advantage of the type of story that a video game is able to tell. And that is that you interact with a video game.
Mm-hmm.
There is player interaction. And this makes a difference. This becomes Valve ends up being like the pioneer of this. And once people saw like what you could do with Half-Life, they start to copy, of course, and in some ways refine it, and in some ways not do as well. Bioshock, when we're sticking with FPSs for a bit. So Bioshock is considered one of the great, storytelling masterstrokes in video games. Bioshock is really interesting. First off, I'm going to go on the record as saying I like Bioshock quite a bit. I know that it kind of lost luster over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Its critical reputation fell, but I played it and I enjoyed it greatly. I think that the Sander Cohen level is an absolute masterpiece. And also, honestly, the best thing about Bioshock is that it legitimately has maybe the greatest, demo level of all time. The demo of Bioshock, it is impossible to not want to play the game. It starts off with you just crashing into the water, and you go into Rapture, and Andrew Ryan makes a speech, and then you see, a group of splicers start pounding on the door to the room that you're in, and they start breaking down the door, and then it ends just as the door breaks down, and the splicers start to come in. Amazing demo. Legitimately, probably the best demo I've ever played. And it's a good game. I like Bioshock. Now, the storytelling in Bioshock is really, really interesting. So this is another thing that I would say. Bioshock is interesting. And also where Bioshock falls flat is that Bioshock knows that it's a video game and makes use of the fact that it's a video game to tell its story. So, one key thing about video games that Bioshock was one of the first games to highlight, and then that gets really picked up in indie games like the Stanley Parable, which is sort of a black comedy or a dark comedy, is the illusion of choice, right?
Right.
Now, Bioshock tackles this. In my opinion, I still think it works. I think I could tell you that I picked up Bioshock not knowing, and by the way, we're gonna spoil the game, but it's 20 years old or something absurd like that. 2007, so 2017, 2018, 2019, 15 years old. Yeah. So, spoiler warning for a 15-year-old game. But, I picked up Bioshock not knowing the Andrew Ryan twist. I don't know if you did or not. I did not know it. You did?
I kinda did.
That's sad.
Yeah. It actually made me want to play it. This is, if we don't mind taking an aside here, I don't really mind spoilers too much, partially because it just, it's okay, so what's the experience here? Well, the experience is that Andrew Ryan makes you choose between being a slave and a man, but you beat him to death because you can't break the conditioning that, he put under you. And to me, it's very compelling idea. I'm not a fatalist, but to me, the idea that somebody put the seeds of his own demise into the future and then willingly, harvests what he sowed is absolutely compelling to me.
So, I could tell you that having played the game and experiencing the twist live, it worked exactly as I am sure the developers intended it. I had, the moment, right?
Yeah.
You go into the room and you see, would you kindly scrawled on the walls. Yep. And just as Andrew Ryan is starting to explain the twist, it clicked in my head a second before he explained it. And my immediate thought was, that's actually genius. That's a brilliant idea. Now, and it is. So, it plays with this idea that if you pay attention to the game, Fontaine, who is pretending to be Atlas for the first half of the game, is asking if you would you kindly do this? Would you kindly do that? And you're doing it. Despite the fact they don't really get you. What's clever about this is they don't get you to question it because it's a video game. And in a video game, if a disembodied voice tells you to do something, you do it.
Yep.
Only, if you really think about what's going on in Bioshock, you have no connection to Rapture. You have no connection to Atlas. You have no connection to Andrew Ryan. So why are you doing any of this? Like, you're putting yourself at major risk to help this guy. Like, wouldn't it make more sense to try and leave and come back with, like, the US Army or something? But you don't. You just do what he says. So, the reveal that "would you kindly" is actually a form of conditioning, and also that the revival pods that have been used throughout the game work on you because you have Andrew Ryan's DNA makes sense on multiple levels. Like, it is set up. They clearly had this in mind from the beginning, and they set the entire game up to play with this idea. Now, the problem with Bioshock that everybody admits and is definitely true, it is completely correct as a criticism, is that after the Andrew Ryan twist, the game basically abandons this entire idea. Like, it
Yeah.
turns into a very, very standard video game story where you have to, like, fight Fontaine in a very lame boss battle that even I, who was quite bad at first person shooters, found very easy. Uh, like, it was a very anticlimactic battle. They don't play at all anymore with the idea that, like, you might be mind controlled. They don't play at all with the idea that you're Andrew Ryan's son. It's just very straightforward.
Yeah, and part of the thing is that, they kind of make it like, oh, well, you're a part of Rapture now or something like that. You're a big daddy. But it's like, Bioshock 2 did it way better. Which, by the way, I'm of the opinion that Bioshock 2 is a fantastic story. Uh,
Give Bioshock 2 a shot because I've heard it from a few people now that I know Yahtzee hated Bioshock 2, and
yeah.
Yahtzee's review of Bioshock 2 was extremely funny. He starts off like the review of Bioshock 2 starts off with, like, Bioshock makes you rethink the concept of like how games tell their stories, how they work. So would Bioshock 2 be a rehash, or would they do something completely different, or would it question the very concept of the video game sequel at all? Would it? And he goes, I'm just kidding, it's a knockoff piece of shit, and then he just rips into the game
I,
for
I,
the rest of the review.
I, personally, I find it way better than most people say. Um, and I consider it a pity that it is held in so low esteem by the reviewers. Partially, though, I think it's to do with the subject matter, which was much more religiously based, and has several pieces to it that eventually they would review with Elizabeth. It's unfortunate, but it may be that the guy doesn't really have all that many stories in him. So, video game creator, sometimes you kind of need a little bit of help. But, to me, as a man who has experienced religion, as you might have as well, Anthony. I don't know about your background, but, random voice on the internet. Um, but it spoke a bit more to me than some of the stuff that, Andrew Ryan was obsessing over. Um, the uh, the idea of this cult in a desiccated, destroyed Rapture that's falling apart as you're playing through it, really does sort of like have a compelling piece to it. These people denied religion. They denied everything they could. It was all selfish capitalism, that devilish Ayn Rand, objectivism. And, what did it bring them? Well, this horror, torture, misery. The, you know, their their religion just left them because the money ran out, the power ran out, and now what? Well, actual religion replaced godless consumerism.
Yeah, I know. Bioshock 2, the word is that. So, okay, here's something else that I will also say with Bioshock. I'm just going to. And by the way, Megabuster Shepherd says Bioshock 2 handled religion better than Infinite. Infinite might be worth discussing later when I talk about video game stories that are terrible, but we're not there yet. Uh, we're not there. I hated Infinite. But anyway, point being, so here's the other thing that I think it's important to mention here. When people talk about Bioshock having a good or bad story, I remember bringing this up like to a college professor one day, and she laughed out loud at the name Andrew Ryan because of how on the nose it was for Ayn Rand. And it's true that on one hand, Bioshock's writing is very on the nose. So the question is it good or is it good for a video game? Now, I am going to make the argument here, despite what I just said about it being on the nose, that it is, in fact, at least up until the twist. I don't think they really knew what to do afterward. And I think there are other problems with it as well, by the way. I think, for example, that the Little Sister's Big Daddy choice is really not well done at all.
It is too heavy for
Yeah.
helping them out than it is for just harvesting them. Like I dig
Right.
it, but like
The,
200 Atom versus like more later isn't the same thing.
and then the problem too is like, so, do you want to be an evil monster who murders little girls or not?
Let me
And then
think
it's
about
like,
it.
unless you're actively going for the bad ending, or you are actively like trying to engage with, like you're playing a character,
Mm-hmm.
no sane person is going to harvest the Little Sisters. Like,
Right.
you just won't. The way they present it does not make that a viable choice, which is kind of my problem.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if the game was harder, maybe, but Bioshock is a famously easy game. Like an infamously easy game because of how easy Revival is and things like that. Like,
I
but
mean,
whatever.
I still die plenty when I play it, and admittedly, I play on the harder difficulties. But it's not as
I did
easy
as
as
well,
they
but
say.
the problem is the Vita chambers. If you turn them off, I think the difficulty is okay. And I play with them on just because I'm not very good at video games, and I don't really like. I don't play FPSs very often. Uh, However, that's the word I get from people who like are really into shooters. But
And I
whatever.
bet these
That's not the
people
point.
also play Dark Souls a bit too much too. It's like
Probably.
I
Uh,
don't really pay attention to what people say about like uh, video game difficulties, just because it's like, look, I don't have time for this. I don't play Dark Souls because I don't like love the aesthetic. I actually consume quite a bit of like Dark Souls media and stuff like that. The in reality problem thing is that I don't play Dark Souls because I'm kind of bad at it, and video games are a power fantasy for me.
eh,
So it's like I get something different out of them, not, oh boy, I spent 15 minutes mashing my face for it. And by the by, I played Demon Souls when it came out. Not the remake like most of these posers. And I
Interesting.
beat multiple bosses. So it's like, I dig it. I dig what you guys saying. It's not like I didn't spend time with this. But it's a completely different experience. And to me, Bioshock has the right difficulty, and the difficulty is entirely in keeping with the stated narratives and events within it. Um, the hold on. So, in Bioshock, you are in a crumbling city, megapolis, whatever, and you have to go about doing things in it, right? The amount of resources you have is much diminished compared to what it could be, because this is a hellhole where people have been scavenging for the last 5, 7 years or whatever. 2 years, I think, actually, excuse me. So, in other words, everything's rotted, everything's decayed. It's a little weird to find a full clip of ammo in a dumpster, but alright. It has a certain amount of difficulty. Every time you meet a Big Daddy, you have to weigh, oh man, I hope I have enough of the good ammo to get through this fight. Because sometimes, you just have to wait. You have to wait. You have to watch this Big Daddy run around, and maybe you're lucky and you can get them to
Hey,
end fight a bit.
there are moments of there are moments in Bioshock where when the mechanics like work together the way they're supposed to
Yep.
are really, really fun. Like one of my favorite moments gaming I remember is using like the make splicers fight each other
Yep.
plasmid. Heads up, we got a spam bot, but in our live chat. But
Spam
anyway,
bot in our live chat. Naked.
yep.
Oh boy, I better click on this. I better
Eh, might
add
want to kill that.
moderator.
Anyway, yeah, with Bioshock, like one of my favorite moments I remember gaming is using like the make splicers fight each other plasmid. Uh, and then just walking through an area like it was like in an area that was entirely like filled with splicers, and I was low on health and had to get through, and I was able to use like the get them to fight each other plasmid, and also had like a drone come out and help me and just walk through while everybody was fighting each other around me, and it was great.
Yeah.
uh you know, that's when the mechanics of Bioshock are doing what they're supposed to do, and it's all working like, clicking properly. Clearly, that was supposed to be a way that you can make it through the game.
Yep.
Uh,
And I don't
with that,
find it. I
go
don't
ahead.
find it reasonable to go like, well, you just click on the bad guys. Like, yeah, but how? And the more strategy you have, like, yeah, technically, Doom was clicking on the bad guy. Um, but things like Bioshock, where it's like, okay, so, Big Daddies are resistant to non armor piercing damage. They're resistant to all the tricks that make splicers freak out, so you have to go about them differently, is fundamentally different than, some of the stuff that people tend to think about when they say, click on the bad guy. Yes, it's clicking on the bad guy, but there's a level to it, like I described earlier. That kind of stuff just kind
Yeah.
of frustrates me a little bit.
So, Bioshock is an example where they were definitely. I'm trying to think of how to put it. They were definitely trying to make use of the fact that Bioshock was a video game to tell their story. Now, they also do this in Infinite, and they do it badly, but I'm going to save that discussion for the end. Bioshock, I think, for the most part, does it well.
Yeah.
It's not perfect. Bioshock was never a perfect game. I think it probably did get a little bit over-reviewed when it came out. Like, it didn't deserve, to be literally the highest rated shooter of all time, which I believe it still is. It's tied with Half-Life 2.
Yeah. Which is itself pretty good.
Um, yeah, and I don't think it really deserves that. But it was trying to do what I think that a good video game story needs to do, which is use the fact that it's a video game to tell its story. So that's great, right?
Right.
Definitely great. Now, with that said, if you're going to ask me, like, what do I think are the peak of video game storytelling, I'm going to stick with Valve. One of my favorite video game stories is, and this is going to be an interesting one to discuss, is Portal.
I mean, it's been discussed. It's certainly,
Our
like I don't.
spam bot's not leaving.
What do you mean it's not leaving? I blocked them multiple times.
It's still posting. Go ahead and check.
I'm already getting rid of it. 84% have already found love with us. Ugh.
Interesting. I'll have to bookmark that for later. 84%. That's relatively high.
I know. How can I just ban?
But anyway. So, here's where Portal gets interesting, though. The story of Portal, when told in a vacuum, is an incredibly simple story. It is a very basic hero's journey plot, right?
Yeah.
Like, there is nothing special about the story of Portal summarized,
Yeah.
So, what is Portal in, like, broken down to its essentials. You wake up in a lab, right?
Yes.
You wake up in a laboratory, and there is some sort of music playing on a speaker, and a robotic voice tells you what to do and where to go. And you get this gun that can shoot portals.
The typical American MK Ultra experience.
Right, exactly. So you get this gun that can shoot portals. You're funneled through a series of tests using first one, then two portal guns, where you could create a way to travel from one place to another instantaneously by going through a portal. There are a series of puzzles based on this, and then you learn that the robotic voice guiding you is actually evil, so you sneak into her control room and defeat her at the end. That's the original Portal. Like, that's it. That's the entire story. That's literally, I have summarized every major thing that has happened. However, what makes Portal, in my opinion, genius, and also, by the way, why when I heard that J.J. Abrams, of all people, was going to make a Portal movie, my immediate reaction was, that is a horrendous idea, is that Portal is an absolutely brilliant story told as a video game, because of the way it makes use of the tropes of video games. For example, the robotic narrator. So Gladys became, after the Portal game, an iconic video game character, and rightly so. Her dialogue is just gold. And I will brook no arguments here. It's actually great. I've heard people go like, no, I find Gladys annoying. Shut up, you're wrong. No. Your opinion is... Your opinion and feelings are misleading you. Gladys's dialogue is genius. But the genius of what's going on with Gladys is that disembodied narrators that guide you through a game are like a thing. The other thing is that Portal is a puzzle game. It is explicitly a puzzle game. It is a series of puzzles. There are very few times in the game where you need to move quickly. And even in those times, you don't really need to move that quickly.
Yeah.
Like, there is a moment... Dominic Powell has a question for us. I will get to it later. I want to go over this tangent a little bit, because I was intending to discuss Portal this whole time. So, even in those quick time events where you have to move quickly, you never really have to move that quickly. Sometimes if a turret ambushes you, like, you need to move fast, but ultimately, you pretty much always have time to get out of the way, right?
Yeah.
This is the way they structure... In fact, they actually structure the boss battle at the end by adding a timer, which is the only real time that time is a serious factor in what you're doing, and makes a relatively simple boss fight a lot more tense.
Yeah.
So, the fact that it's a disembodied narrator, you don't need the game to have a story. Puzzle games don't have stories, like, especially at the time that Portal was made. Portal actually changed that somewhat, right? But when Portal was made, like, the expectation was not that a puzzle game would have a story. And the expectation was not that the narrator would necessarily end up being a character. Like, they could, but especially if it's just to guide you through puzzles, it could just be a narrator. So, the thing about Portal is that, first off, it is unclear early on in the game if Gladys is pre-recorded or not. Like, it only becomes more obvious that she's not pre-recorded later in the game.
Yeah.
The second thing is that a lot of the storytelling in Portal is entirely optional, what they call the Ratman Dens, which we only know as the Ratman Dens because of third-party media, but the name doesn't matter. The point is, somebody is in hiding, and he's warning you about Gladys. This is where the famous cake is a lie meme comes from.
Yep.
You know, it comes from he's in hiding, and he's warning you about Gladys. So, you don't really have any choice but to continue progressing through the game, but now you're wary, who is Gladys? And then things start to change when Gladys sends you through a live robot testing facility, like a live turret testing facility.
Yep.
which he literally says, "Oh, this test chamber is down, so you're just going to go through the live turret facility." And that's when it's both very funny, especially because the turrets themselves are funny. Uh, and it's funny, but it's also pretty messed up.
Yeah.
Like, she just sent you through, a completely unrelated test and just says, "Well, I'm interested. Can you survive?" The companion cube was another example. It's both very funny, but it's also a form of psychological torture that Gladys is trying to hit you with. The
Yep.
thing about going behind the bowels of Portal is, once again, this is something that makes sense in a standard narrative, but in a video game is not the norm. Especially not in a puzzle game, which is what Portal was. It was twisting your expectations,
Yep.
right? You were in games like this, you don't go behind the scenes. You finish the puzzles and you end the game. But that's not how Portal does it. The fact that Portal ends with a boss fight is so brilliant because, on one hand, it seems inevitable by the time you get there. Like, you've been waiting for the showdown with Gladys the entire time, the only other character. But on the other hand, it also was not what you expected when you started the game at all, because you're playing a puzzle game. Puzzle games don't have boss fights.
Yep.
It was making use of the tropes of the video game. The trope of the disembodied narrator, the trope of puzzle games and the way that video games are structured, right? In
Yep.
order to tell its story. So and it is a perfectly paced, perfectly structured story. This is the reason why Portal would be a terrible movie, because told as a movie, the story of Portal is nothing special. All of the surprise of Portal comes from, our spam bot's back. Uh, all of the surprise of Portal comes from the fact that it is a video game. Like, making it into a movie literally ruins the experience. Like, I don't understand who thought that would be a good idea. I mean, J.J. Abrams,
Well,
obviously.
here's probably what's happened. He probably bought the rights to it, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm going to do this just to see what the media hype would be." And then if it's like, "Ugh," he's not going to do it. Like, because video game movies tend to be very poor investments.
See, though, to me, like, Portal is such a specific case where the entire appeal of its very good story is that it is a video game. That it would not work as not a video game.
Right.
Like,
Which is why it's probably going to be one of those things where it's like, "Yeah, we're totally going to do it," and then
and they never do.
and they never do because
Hopefully.
they did it
I
with
certainly
Monster
hope
Hunter.
so.
That's the reason why we don't have like a Monster Hunter movie going out there is because Larry sold the rights, and
Oh,
you know,
no.
yeah,
Not that type of monster. No. No, not Monster Hunter the game, Monster Hunter the franchise. No, no, Monster Hunter by Larry Correa, the book series. No, the game is completely separate.
it's a
My
Japanese
brother,
movie.
my brother in the background going, "There is a Monster Hunter movie." Like, no, we are not talking about the game. We're talking about Larry Correa's Monster Hunter.
The
Uh,
spirit is mostly the same though.
eh, I guess maybe ish. I don't know.
Yeah.
No, I would say no. Like, the, Larry Correa's Monster Hunter is like urban fantasy, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's like killing monsters for fun and profit.
I guess on the very basic level. We had a joke where we were talking about, oh, I'm reading a manga. Oh, really? It's great. Oh, what's the manga about? Oh, it's about an organization of demon hunters. That does not narrow it down at all. Well, it was made into a very well received anime. Okay, again, not helping. uh,
Right,
do you mean Chainsaw Man, Jujutsu Kaisen, or Demon Slayer? Pick one.
right.
Uh,
Dororon, no, I'm
but
kidding. They
whatever.
haven't made it on
It's
man.
entirely unrelated. But anyway, going back to
Yep.
Portal. So, what does Portal do so well? Well, Portal remembers it's a video game, makes use of the tropes of video games, and keeps the interactivity of the player into account. The player is the one who needs to make the decision to go behind the scenes. You could just die, in which case you'll restart from that point. But like apparently that actually according to the creators, that happened a lot in Portal, where players would not even realize that you were supposed to do anything. They just thought the game ended when Gladys shoved you into the fire. And I kind of get that,
NPCs,
although what was that?
NPCs all.
Yes. I sort of get it though, because the game does kind of like Gladys says goodbye. Like I could sort of see that. Honestly, I could kind of imagine the game ending there and thinking that was actually amazing. Uh, like that's such a ballsy ending.
Right.
Uh, but that's not what they do, of course. And what they do is much better. So Portal 2, Portal 2 is interesting. I know like that Matthew Matosis, who is in my S tier of critics. He hasn't done anything in a long time, sadly. F's in the chat. Uh, anyway, he hasn't done anything in a long time, but he's in my S tier of critics. And him and Yahtzee were both like sort of critical of Portal 2 as like not innovating enough. I don't really agree with them.
Same.
Like, it's always good, I think, when there are people who I really respect who make well-reasoned cases for something. Like, I take that, I take it seriously if someone like Matthew Matosis says, like, he doesn't really like where they went with Portal 2. I want to go, okay, so if I do like it, I want to be able to articulate it properly. So, I think that Portal 2 is trying to do something very different than the original Portal, right? Like, the original Portal had shock value on its side, in a sense.
Yes.
Nobody knew what it was. Nobody was expecting it to be what it was. Nobody knew who Gladys was. This idea of a puzzle game with a boss battle at the end was a new thing, right? Again, probably not unique, because very few things in the world are unique, but certainly not the norm in the industry at the time.
Right.
I mean, like, I'm sure you'll find somebody who's like, well, actually, if you play the 1988 puzzle game, Tetro, you fight the Tetro monster at the end. So, I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, you
Like,
see, if you go back to Greek myth, Theseus was the first gamer who killed the Minotaur at the end of the labyrinth.
which was a puzzle.
Yes.
No. Portal 2 is interesting. I think that the story of Portal 2 is great. However, it is different than Portal 1. First, the story of Portal 1 is very much like a black comedy. It's the story of Portal 1 is very much a black comedy. Portal 2 is, don't get me wrong, there are dark moments in it, like the whole idea that Cave Johnson's assistant's like mind was like forcibly downloaded into Gladys, and there is actually like a cut piece of content where she's telling Cave like, no, I don't want this, don't do this, and it was so disturbing that they took it out of the game. I think correctly, by the way.
Yes.
I think it was like a level 2 disturbing for the tone of the game.
Yes.
But like there are disturbing elements of Portal 2. However, Portal 2 I think is a lot more overtly funny. Like
Yes.
Wheatley is just a straight up comedic character. Gladys is like, comedic villainous, and Wheatley sort of comes a villain later, but like it's hard not to think of Wheatley as pure comic relief.
Right.
So I think in that sense, as a comedy, I found Portal 2 hilarious. Like, I thought it was extremely funny from beginning to end. I do think that the pacing got a little bit off in the middle. And I also think that the final boss fight with Wheatley was a little bit too similar to the Gladys boss fight.
Yes.
However, like, I'll be honest, this was exactly my reaction when completing the game. I had finished the boss fight with Wheatley, and like the lab was going up, and I was like, that was it? That was the fight? I'm like, that was just the Gladys fight, but easier. I'm like, what am I missing? And then I realized that the game wanted me to shoot the moon with the portal gun, and I started laughing my ass off, and I said, okay, I forgive you. That's really funny. I'm like, it's fine. It's like, you know what? For that reveal at the end, like, I'll give it to you. Uh, I'm sorry for doubting you, because the shoot the moon thing is such a brilliantly set up plot device.
Yeah.
Uh, where Cave Johnson mentions in passing that he uses moon dust to create the portal surfaces, and then he reveals that he dies because moon dust is actually extremely toxic.
Right.
So when it ends with you staring up at the moon and Wheatley goes, "Say goodbye to your precious human moon, because it cannot help you now." And when I realized what it wanted me to do, I just started laughing. I said that's an incredible ending. No complaints. Also, the co-op of Portal 2 is amazing, which doesn't really have anything to do with the story. I mean, the story of the co-op, I don't even remember it. It's fine. Uh, I actually I think that the story of the co-op was that Gladys found like a group of humans that she awoke for testing, and then they added a little DLC to the co-op where all of the humans are already dead, and it's been like 5 minutes, uh, which is very funny.
I mean, yeah, it's you know, just thinking about it, you know, is like, all right, found some humans. Oh boy, more testing, and then they're all dead. Uh,
Yeah.
hold
Um.
on. Let's talk.
Portal.
Let's
Yeah. Let's move on.
take a second for questions and stuff like that. Um,
That's fair.
Dominic Powell says, "Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Dominic. What are your thoughts on the current state of storytelling in video games? We will get back to that because we are sort of
There's a lot to say.
progressing
Mhm.
through, and there is a lot to say." KOTOR in the first Mega Buster Shepherd says, KOTOR in the first two Mass Effects have great narratives, at least in my opinion. Yeah, you know, I played Mass Effect a couple times. I played KOTOR once. It's pretty good. It's I think KOTOR is a little bit overrated, and I'll explain that in a little bit once we're done with this section, because KOTOR is the next good stepping off point, I believe. Off topic, are you Calvinist or more of a Lutheran? I don't know who these strange men are. They sound gay, Megabuster Shepherd. But I'll have you know that I believe that nothing is a surprise to God, but we have free will in all our actions, according to the limited understanding that we have of free will. In other words, me starting to pinch myself to defy free will is not free will. It's me being a little human bastard. Dominic Powell says the point of a sequel is to improve or succeed from its predecessor. However, one shouldn't stray too far from why it was successful or not. Rehash plot points from the first movie. Yeah, it's about that. He hasn't played Portal. You should. It's usually free. Megabuster Chapter says, I like
It's
Half
free,
Life's.
just very cheap nowadays.
Oh, it was free for a while. It was a bonus to the orange box, which predecessed.
Oh yeah, that's true. It was. Well, in fact, I think I own the orange box version
I
of
still
it.
keep mine around.
Yeah.
The best
Anyway,
part about Half Life is the environmental storytelling, which is something that does. I know, Mega Buster Shepherd. I'm just giving you a little crap. Uh, just remember that we cannot understand God's view of it because He is God. If we can know God and we can understand His heart. David was a man after God's own heart. Therefore, it is reasonable to say that God's heart is knowable. However, when you get into temporal shenanigans and God doing his thing, it is not as clear cut as people say. There's a good example of the crippled man that Peter healed before he preached to 5,000 men. Jesus walked by him all the time. Like, whenever Jesus went into the temple, he had to walk by this guy. I don't know whether Jesus just looked at him and he's like, hey man, soon, soon, but not me, you know, or whether he just ignored him, which I don't know. Like, it's just one of those things. And I do know what Luther and Calvin stood for, except I always find that, like, after 500 plus years, the language has drifted so that you don't know what they mean in the same way they meant it. Calvin is a good example of this. Calvin would be a very mild Calvinist these days. The same with Luther. And of course, I am now going to bring it in because if you play a video game, are you exercising your free will? And maybe this was a better question to have around the Bioshock section. But, it's one of those things. It's one of those things to consider. Like open world, like Breath of the Wild and Elden Ring and stuff like that. How much free will do you really have? Well, you have one of 6 endings. Uh, the basic, the Dung Eater, the Fia the Deathbed Companion, Gold Mask, uh, Ronnie, and the Frenzied Flame. Like, it's like, but you choose among them, like, how much free will are you actually exercising? Like, in reality, if they were being, if they wanted to really go for it, they should have had a Rykard ending, a Mikella ending, or a Moog ending, and a few other ones, just, advancing the cause. But they didn't. And it's the same way for our own lives. We have plenty of options on how we, take care of the lives we have before us. And we always have a choice to end our run. However, when it comes to God's perspective, we are no longer as, how do I want to put it, as free as we could be, just because God can know all the choices we can make, and more specifically, the choice we will make. Don't do heroin. There we go. That's it. That's all I wanted to say.
Fair enough.
Mega Buster Shepherd, does that answer your question in a much more serious answer? Are you satisfied? We love you here. We want to make sure you're happy. To a point. Not too happy.
Not.
Just happy.
Dominic Powell says storytelling from Half-Life has aged well. I agree, but
Yep.
that's partially because Valve set the industry standard with it. At least for a very long time.
Oh my goodness.
Right? Like,
I've reported these people.
they're back. They're back.
Why isn't there just a ban button? I've hid the user.
I don't know. I do find, honestly, I actually find the spamming a little bit amusing. I know it's not good, don't get me wrong, but I'm amused.
Right. We're big enough for it.
Exactly. But anyway, so Ben promised me I could talk about this, but I gave him carte blanche to cut me off. Sly Cooper. I wanted to bring it up. And I'm going to bring it up because it's a great example, especially in conjunction with the 4th game in the series, Sly Cooper 4 Thieves in Time, of how to do good storytelling and then how to mess it up, and how to do good storytelling in a video game. So I'm going to give a quick summary here of why I think that the Sly Cooper series, number 1, is, pun intended, criminally underrated. It's actually not pun intended, but every time I say that, like, everybody thinks it's a pun, so it just is now. It is a criminally underrated series, number 1, or at the very least, if not underrated, underappreciated, which might be more accurate because everybody who's played it seems to understand that it's really, really good. But it never got as popular as it deserved to get.
Yeah.
So, the first Sly Cooper game, pretty interesting game. It plays, even though it is a PS2, and the PS2 was the best console. I actually don't know this, but it was a very good console. So, the original Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus. First off, it's a kid's game, right? It's about a thief named Sly who's a raccoon. He has a friend who's a nerd named Bentley. And he has his friend Murray, who is a hippo and who's the getaway driver. And in the first game, he's just kind of a loser. And, that's the joke. And you play as Sly and the story is that your father was murdered and you became an orphan, and that's where you made your friends. And he was part of a long line of master thieves, and they stole your book of how to be a master thief, the Thievius Raccoonus, and you're going to take on the gang that killed your father led by the mysterious Clockwork, and get your book back. Now, the original Sly Cooper has excellent game mechanics, but we're not talking about mechanics, we're talking about storytelling. Mechanics are worth bringing up, though, because they do come up as part of the storytelling later, which is one of the reasons that the game is so good. Uh, it's a really, really mechanically well-made game, and that's what makes the first game, in my opinion, still playable today. That and the fact that there's a lot of variety in gameplay. Lots of mini-games and things. Ultimately, though, the first Sly Cooper, even though it is a PS2 game, plays a lot like the old-school PlayStation 1 games, where there wasn't that much of a story. It was more of just an excuse to move into different environments. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's how Sly 1 plays. If you were to play it now, you wouldn't think very much about the story, to be honest. Like, Sly 1 Character of the Year, I think, the year that the game came out. Mostly just because, like, he was a memorable character. He was fun. He had a dramatic plot line. However, it gets interesting in that there are 5 sections of the game. You know, you're taking on the Fiendish 5 gang. Part 5 is where you start to see that, hey, maybe the series kind of has something here. Because first off, part 5, they do this thing where they're like, so we don't know anything about the villain except he appears to be this giant mechanical owl. And then Sly says, you know, I noticed something looking through the Thievius Raccoonus. There is like a drawing of this mysterious villain who is known only as Clockwork in the background of all of the pages of my family's book, going back hundreds of years. How is this possible? Who is this person? And then they start to do things with character development, where Sly rescues his love interest, Carmelita, who is like the cop chasing him. They do a thing which I think is really, really smart, where, and you can insert your jokes here, I know, but they take like the Lupin Zenigata relationship and then add sexual tension, which I think is a genius idea. Now, I know that the joke is, well, isn't there already sexual tension? But no, I'm serious. I actually think it was a good idea. Yeah, and it's a funny joke, but whatever. It adds a lot of really interesting tension to Sly and Carmelita's relationship. Megabuster Shepard says Sly is a video game equivalent of Lupin the Third. Yeah, it is very close to like a Lupin the Third game in some ways. So, but they do really interesting things in this 5th case. Sly goes to rescue Carmelita, who's captured by Clockwork, and then after he's captured, Carmelita, who formerly has been trying to catch Sly, teams up with him, so you have character development. Bentley, who was afraid to go into the field, has to go into the field to rescue Sly from Clockwork. Murray needs to go into the field a little bit at the end. You actually take on Clockwork one-on-one, and you learn that he's been like the generational enemy of the Cooper line, and that he's been taking, which is an incredible concept for a pulp villain. He like hates the Cooper gang so much that he replaced his body with machine parts so that he could continually torture them, and only left Sly alive so that he could prove that without their precious book, the Cooper gang would never be able to defeat him, which is amazing as a cult, which is amazing for a pulp villain.
Yeah.
That's such a great pulpy concept, complete with an ending where, as it turns out, he's not really dead after all. It also finishes off with probably my favorite cutscene ever, where Carmelita, who is the cop that's chasing him, by the way, says that their deal is that she will give Sly a 10-second head start. So they're standing in, this is the entire cutscene. They're standing on a bridge over like a volcano, and Sly starts counting down as him and Carmelita stare each other down, and Sly doesn't move. And then at 1, he kisses Carmelita, and like they show her point of view and hearts go up. But then when she comes to, she's been handcuffed to the railing, and Sly runs off. Honestly, one of my favorite cutscenes ever. It's so good. So that's Sly 1, and it's like, maybe there's something here. Like, they gave us, you know, actual character development. They gave us all of this stuff. And this is why Sly 2 is one of the greatest sequels ever made. Because Sly 1 was a well-reviewed game. and it was a good game. And they could have just made Sly 1 but bigger, and it would have been good, and I would have enjoyed it. But instead, they completely remade the game and completely remade the story, and it was so much better. It's honestly unbelievable. First off, the one thing you need to understand about Sly 2 is that Sly 2 is actually a tragedy, and I mean this in like a structural sense. In a tragedy, the story ends with the heroes at a lower point than when they began, right? That is what makes the story a tragedy. And the plot
Yes.
of Sly 2 is that after he defeated Clockwork in Sly 1, the machine parts of Clockwork were spread out among a different gang called the Claw Gang, who are each using a different part of Clockwork to run a drug smuggling operation. They call it Spice, but it's clearly like meant to be drugs, but they can't call it that because it's a kid's game. So they call it a spice smuggling operation. Uh, and a new character named Neela is added into the game, who is another cop who's working with Carmelita, who Carmelita doesn't like very much, but who is helping out Sly. Now, the first thing that it does that I think is genius, this is the moment, like, early on in the game, the structure is very similar to Sly 1. There is a villain who has a thing that you want, and you fight them, and you get that thing. Then, in Section 3 of the game, they completely change things up. When Neela betrays you, and Sly and Murray get sent off to jail in Prague, which they portray as like a horror movie-esque place, and Bentley needs to rescue them on his own. This is such an incredible twist for so many reasons. First off, it is a very obvious twist if you know what you're looking for. However, what makes it work is that this is a sequel to Sly 1. And in Sly 1, the structure of the game was exactly the same in the early parts of Sly 2. You are in no way expecting this level of narrative complexity. Like, this is just a level of storytelling that the game has not seen up to this point. So the very fact that it is a sequel to Sly 1, it is using to structure twists in the second game. So that's one way that a video game can use the medium to its advantage, right?
Yeah.
You know, the tropes of a game and in order to surprise the player. It's also using the mechanics. I said I would get back to this. Bentley plays using technology, very scared, very skittish. He's always bouncing and looking around. And now he is the only character you get to play as, which is a stroke of genius, because you feel the way that he plays. Now, the game continues. It ends with one of the most shocking endings, I think, to a game I have ever played. They managed to get all of the Clockwork parts, and they managed to defeat the revived Clockwork, who, like, combines with Neela in an extremely pulpy ending. But Bentley gets paralyzed from the waist down. Like, legitimately, something falls on his legs. He says, I can't move my legs. This is in a kid's game. And this is just a thing. Like, this happened, this remains. So Bentley gets paralyzed from the waist down, and Sly turns himself in to Carmelita. And again, the final cutscene is just amazing, where him and Carmelita are on a chopper going back to Paris, where Sly is going to be booked. And they start flirting with each other, and then they have like a date, basically, while Sly is going to be booked. But Sly realizes that Bentley and Murray have left him a parachute and also gotten rid of the pilot. And it's just been going in circles for like an hour. So Sly jumps away. And that's how the game ends. Now, where it gets really incredible is that in the third game, Sucker Punch, which is the company that made the Sly Cooper series, actions have consequences in Sly Cooper, which is one of the things that I love about the game. When you meet Bentley in Sly 3, he is in a wheelchair. Like, the fact that he got paralyzed at the end of Sly 2, that remains. That is now a part of his character. He is in a wheelchair permanently. Murray is so traumatized, he actually goes on an Aboriginal spirit quest, which is hilarious. That first off is extremely funny. Oh no, spam bots.
I want to
They're
be
back.
clear here that I have been banning them and hiding the user as fast as they come up.
Eh. Uh, anyway, yeah, Murray is going on an Aboriginal spirit quest because he is so traumatized by what happened at the end of the second game. And the entire game is like about reckoning with legacy. Everybody is changing. They need to pull off like their biggest job ever. It's the Cooper Vault. Sly's whole family, right, left all of their wealth in this vault that
The
Sly
One
needs to
Piece,
get.
the
What?
legendary One Piece.
Yeah, exactly. So the end of Sly 3 is one of my favorite endings to any trilogy ever. Sly and Carmelita, it's about, Sly realizes that he was wrong to be a thief, which is unbelievable for a game about a thief to say, right?
Right.
He realizes that Carmelita was right, who was the one who was chasing him. So they have a moment where Sly fakes that he lost his memory, and Carmelita tells him, "Well, you're my partner now," which is meant to be a moment of character development for the both of them. Carmelita is willing to stretch the truth so that she can have a life with Sly, which is something that she previously was not willing to make a compromise on. She's not willing to recognize that Sly sometimes had a point and wasn't the villain, and now she is. And Sly is willing to give up his life of crime and join Carmelita. So they crack the Cooper vault, and it brings everybody's story to Bentley gets a girlfriend, Murray becomes a stock car racer, and it leaves everything on a satisfying conclusion. It's a perfect ending to the series. Now, I'm not even going into the various storytelling choices made in the game. For example, at one point, you have to meet a character who was one of the villains, I should say, of the first game, and he becomes a main character in the third game. He joins your gang, and you actually need to replay a level from the first game to like resolve his mental block that is keeping him from joining your gang, which is a genius idea. Like, the entire thing has a narrative unity that was set up thematically from game 1 to game 3, and it always remembered that it was a video game, right? And it was always remembering that actions have consequences in the story. It was making use of the mechanics to tell the story. It was genius. The Sly Cooper series, legitimately one of my favorite stories in a video game ever. One of my favorite endings to a game ever. It wrapped things up perfectly, and then they made Sly 4. So,
You sound less
Sly
than
4.
excited.
What was that?
You sound less than excited.
Uh, Sly 4, when they announced it, it was like 8 years from the end of Sly 3, and it was a different company. It was no longer Sucker Punch. It was a company called Sanzaru. Now, here is the thing about Sly 4 that is very, very interesting. I was actually excited about it when I heard Sanzaru talking about it. They appeared to be fans of Sly Cooper, right? Like, they genuinely seemed like they cared about the franchise. So, and the pre release stuff looked really good. Now, here's what I will say the positives of Sly 4. It looks great, and the gameplay is basically the same, which means it's very good. It's not perfect. Like, they make the maps really large, but I don't think that they compensate with the guards. So as a result, it becomes really, really trivial to sneak around the maps, which doesn't make you feel very much like a thief, and that's kind of disappointing. But for the most part, the gameplay is back. However, the problem with Sly 4 is that the story is absolutely terrible. Like, legitimately, it's embarrassing how bad the story is. It is shameful. Uh,
When was Sly 4 released?
2008, I think.
2008.
I want to say yes. So, the storytelling of Sly 4 is heinous. First off, it opens up with this is how they justify begin creating a sequel. Sly is living with Carmelita. Carmelita does not know that Sly remembers that he is a thief. Now, first off, I want you to think for a moment about this from Carmelita's perspective. Sly had friends and a life, and she's just okay with him sacrificing that. Now, I always thought in Sly 3, they leave it intentionally ambiguous if Sly tells Carmelita or not that he lost his memory, and I always just kind of assumed that he did. Right? Like, they
Right.
worked it out. You know. But no, apparently not. Which is kind of messed up from Carmelita's perspective. Like, she's basically dealing with, like, an amnesiac, and she's not telling him about any of his previous life. And she's just okay with this.
Right.
And Sly, meanwhile, is content to live this lie until he says, one day, I got the itch. And then he decides, he learns, like, Sly is a thief that only steals from master thieves, because it's a kid's game. So he learns that, like, art is going missing from a museum, so he's going to try and steal it first, or whatever. I forget the exact... It doesn't matter. The point is, it put him morally on the right plane, right? That this was happening. That was the key here. And Sly says, but then I got the itch. So he contacts Bentley and Murray, and they decide to pull off this heist, and Carmelita catches him. Now, Sly is very apologetic when Carmelita catches him. Number one, this is terrible. Like, the whole fun of the Sly-Carmelita dynamic is that Carmelita was a person who had the law on her side, and who had weaponry on her side, but Sly was always the master of every interaction, because he was suave and cool and badass, right? Think of the Han Solo Princess Leia dynamic. That's exactly what this was supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
Leia has political power. Leia has the, right? And Leia is no shrinking violet, but Han Solo always gets the upper hand in every interaction because Han Solo is cool and badass. That's the Sly-Carmelita dynamic. Seeing Sly apologetic in front of Carmelita is extremely not fun.
Yeah.
Like, even if it makes sense. And then, if you think about it, it doesn't really make sense. Like, shouldn't Carmelita be apologizing to him for thinking he was an amnesiac and not telling him about his life and friends? Like, apparently not, because the game treats her as entirely in the right. And Sly needs to, like, make it up to her somehow. I mean, I'm not saying that Sly did the right thing either, but surely this is a two-way street. Like,
yes.
Both sides are supposed to be at fault here. But no, not at all. So the game has time travel. And this is what I will say about the time travel. You get to play as Sly's ancestors, and these are generally the most fun parts of the game. However, it makes the story even more nonsensical. Time travel stories are extremely, extremely difficult to do well, and Sly 4 literally does not try. Like, some of the storytelling decisions that they make are absolutely shameful. For example, at one point, they are driving away from the villain and they're careening off a cliff. And the way that their time travel works is that you take an artifact from that era, and it brings you to the area and the era of the artifact.
Right.
Now, that's fine as a method of time travel. I don't care about that. Like, it's a MacGuffin. It doesn't really make sense, but it works. I understand what they're doing. However, the really shameful part of this is that Murray, so he has a necklace from the third game that's like an aboriginal necklace, and they grab it and use it completely randomly. And remember, this was not a necklace that he got in this game. He got it in the third game. Completely randomly, it brings them to the next story point. Like, just imagine finding a random object, like a rock on the road, going, I don't know where we're supposed to go next, and go, well, how about we try this rock? And then you shove it into a time machine and go, let's see where it brings us. And then where it brings you is exactly where you need to go. This is what happens.
Was the villain Aboriginal?
No. It is I cannot emphasize enough to you how little sense this makes. And they don't even try. Like, they just go, what are the chances? And then they keep going. Like, literally, I think, like, they go, like, man, the odds of that were low. And nobody questions it. It's like, low? Like, what do you mean low? The odds of that were not possible. That doesn't make any sense. What's going on? It's like, what is this story? And then, like, there are just so many problems. Sly's character is already totally ruined. The idea that he would get the itch and rejoin thievery just completely invalidates the ending of the third game. The entire point of the ending of the third game was that Sly leaves his life of crime behind because he realizes that it was wrong, and then he goes and joins Carmelita, who he realizes was right. And now it's just like, nope. No, never mind. I got the itch, so it's fine.
Sorry, baby.
Murray. So Murray's whole thing was that he goes on like an Aboriginal spirit quest. The whole point of Murray's character arc in the previous game is that he needs to find some sort of emotional balance. He needs to, come to peace with himself, which he does by the end of the third game. Because again, the third game wraps up all of their character arcs very well. Well, in this game, he is upset because they find another strong character who, on one job, they pick over Murray, and Murray gets offended. And I'm like, that is so not who this character is supposed to be. Like, it's just amazing to me. Like, this is the character who has spent the entire series figuring out and coming to terms with his role on the team. Like, he is the muscle. He has a specific thing that he is meant to do. He's the heart of the team, and he knows his place, and he is okay with it. Like, the fact that he would get upset because he wasn't able to do one job is just absolutely ludicrous. Bentley gets a girlfriend, and she was a very popular character, and rightly so. Like, they actually do the work in Sly 3 of setting up her relationship with Bentley. She first has a crush on Sly, Bentley rescues her, they mutually they have an understanding with each other. She ended up being like a fan favorite character, and they turn her into a villain in this game, which everybody hated. It's like,
so what lessons can we pull from this?
So, yeah, to sum up, the lesson you could pull is Mega Buster Shepard is right. Sometimes you need to know when to let an IP end, is Sly 4 in a nutshell. I think, though, more importantly, if I were to sum up, like, the lessons that you would get out of Sly 4 and playing it and all of the problems it has, this is to say nothing of the horrendous ending. It literally ends on a cliffhanger, then gets no sequel, which is just the worst thing that you could do. But anyway, it ends on a cliffhanger and gets no sequel, which is the worst thing you could do. But I would say that you need to understand your characters. The thing about the Sly Cooper series is that, unlike other video games, in Sly Cooper, the story was very much at the heart of what Sly Cooper was, right? Like, I don't know how else to describe it except that. Like, the third game had a lot of different disparate elements, and the way that they unify all of it is by connecting it to the story, right?
Yeah.
Like, Sly 2, the identity of Sly Cooper as a franchise is very much tied up with its storytelling. So for Sly 4 to neglect that, I think what I would say is that even as good as the graphics were and as good as the mechanics were, it's missing so much of the heart of what makes Sly Cooper, like what makes the franchise what it is. It's very, very hard to be satisfied with the game like that. You need to understand your franchise. You need to understand your characters. I mean, this isn't really video game specific, but I mean, the previous games would constantly be using things they were doing in previous games, mechanics and things like that, to tell their story. And Sly 4 never even tried. It was like it didn't understand what it was supposed to be. I guess that's what I would say. You have to understand what you're supposed to be. You have to understand what you're trying to do. I would recommend the Sly Cooper trilogy today. I think the gameplay is fantastic. Not every mini game in it is created equal, but some are great. And the main platforming sections are superb and have aged incredibly well. I think that graphically, because it's so stylized with its cel shaded art style, it holds up very well. And I think that the story is absolutely great. Uh, Sly 4, I would recommend to somebody who maybe was a completionist about the series or maybe just did not care about the story at all. The problem with that is I don't know anybody who played Sly Cooper and did not care about the story because it was so important to the franchise. Uh, like you need to know what you're like. You need to know your characters. You need to know your story. The people who
Yep.
made Sly 4 were fans of the characters and they created fan fiction. They did not like I think that's really what it was. You could tell they were
Disgusting.
having fun with it. Like the game was fun in some places, but they did not understand the story. So, Megabuster Shepherd says the way Anthony feels about Sly 4 is basically what my feelings are on Halo Post Reach. I didn't need to see what happened to Chief and Cortana, but alas, Microsoft. Yeah, and I go back and forth too on should we make a Sly 5? On one hand, it's like, no, just let it die. On the other hand, Sly 4 was already made and they ended it on a cliffhanger. It would be nice to get a DLC where they at least like wrap it up and maybe fix the truly egregious stuff, like, Penelope being a villain or Sly being trapped in Egypt, which is actually a thing. He gets trapped in ancient Egypt, and that is how Sly 4 ends.
Because he's starting the dynasty. Because that's like the earliest Sly family thing, right?
I actually think, well, no, first off, it was, except now we have a prehistoric Sly.
Uh oh.
Uh, Bob, that was the prehistoric level with the rock. uh, so they aren't even consistent on that. Uh, yeah, like I'm not going into detail now. I could, believe me, I could.
Yeah.
But the story is so bad. It's so bad. Like I cannot emphasize to you enough how little sense it makes at every point.
Mm-hmm.
So, moving on to modern video game storytelling. I'm going to give an interesting example here. The Last of Us. First off, Ben, you've played The Last of Us, correct?
Nope.
Oh, you haven't. I'm surprised. I thought you did.
No.
Interesting. So, The Last of Us is an interesting example of a game. Not The Last of Us 2, The Last of Us. I think The Last of Us is good, right? I think it is both
Sure.
a good game and I think it is a good story. However, I think The Last of Us is a bad video game story. And my contention is based on this. Unlike the previous examples, Portal, Bioshock, of good video game stories, right? Portal, Bioshock, Half-Life, and the Sly Cooper trilogy. If The Last of Us were not a video game, the story would basically be unaffected. Now, that isn't to say that there is no example in the game where the gameplay and the story interact. Like, there's some parts in the middle where you're playing as Ellie and it's a lot harder to play, and that kind of mirrors
Yeah.
what's happening in story. But for the most part, if you were to get rid of the game and just play it as a movie, the story would be affected not at all. And I think that's a big problem. Megabuster Shepherd says, I'm playing through it now. I like it. Kind of just a movie with gameplay, though. Exactly.
Yep.
That's what it is. It's a movie with gameplay. And this is how Naughty Dog does all of their stories, right? They're infamous about this.
Yeah.
It's the Naughty Dog effect on storytelling. Now, I'm not even going to touch The Last of Us 2. I think that the story is heinously bad. Uh, but, I think it's heinously bad for reasons that are unrelated to it being a video game. It's more because it's a vanity project by a man who hates his audience. Yeah.
Yep.
So, yeah, the story is bad. Uh, However, the original The Last of Us, that's the thing. The story of the original Last of Us is not bad by any means. Like, the ending of The Last of Us is genuinely thought-provoking and interesting. Yeah. Like, and they do a good job setting it up. They do a good job. It's I've heard Yahtzee call them like dad simulator games, and The Last of Us is definitely a worthy attempt in that genre. Yeah. As a dad simulator.
Yep.
Like, they do a good job setting up the relationship between Ellie and Joel where you're invested in them. However, I think that the problem with The Last of Us, and this is why, by the way, The Last of Us 2 winning Game of the Year over Hades, we mentioned this at the time, that's so absolutely absurd. Like, it's almost mind-boggling. Like,
Yeah.
because Hades was literally better in every aspect of game. Visually, I mean, I know that The Last of Us 2 was a visual marvel. But the problem is, The Last of Us 2 tried to be photorealistic, and photorealism inevitably and always ages badly. Just look at them remaking The Last of Us again now for the PS5. Like, The Last of Us looks great, and it was top of the line for the PS3. And it's already aged out.
Right.
So, The Last of Us 2 does look great. However, because it tried for photorealism, it was never going to age particularly well. Hades did not try for photorealism, so Hades looks amazing. Uh, the gameplay of The Last of Us 2 is quite good. However, it is also very standard. You could buy a dozen games that play exactly like The Last of Us 2. The gameplay of Hades is incredibly well polished. Has a ton more variety. The story of Hades is better in basically every way. The way that it tells its story, though, specifically, we promise not to dwell on Hades, so I will not, but Hades uses the fact that it's a video game to tell its story, and in fact is one of the best examples of this. It's actually amazing at using the fact that it's a video game to tell its story. Like, it's incredibly clever at the way that it does it. And it is very much aware of what it's doing, whereas The Last of Us 2 does not use the fact that it's a video game to its advantage at all. Neither, though, does The Last of Us, and that's the thing I want to get at. So, I question if you're using video games. It's not so much that I think that The Last of Us shouldn't exist. I question if The Last of Us should exist as a video game. Like, The Last of Us as a game, I think it's fine that it exists. But if you're going to make it as a video game, they really should have done more to incorporate the fact that it's a video game into the way that it told its story. Because otherwise you're missing out. Like, you're missing the entire point of a game. It offers something that other things don't do. Interactivity. It offers mechanics. Other mediums don't have mechanics that you can manipulate. Right? Video games do. And The Last of Us does not take advantage of that.
Yep.
So, and this is the problem, I think, with modern AAA storytelling. Assassin's Creed is really infamous for this, too. So, I have a thing with the Assassin's Creed games. Every single time a new game comes out, I look at it longingly because it looks great. And I know that I will not like it, because I have never liked an Assassin's Creed game, even though they all look like they will be amazing. So I wait for it to go on sale for, like, extremely cheap. Like, they will lose money levels of cheap, or it's given away. Like, Steam sale, $5 for the $60 game. Right?
Right.
And then I will get it, and I will start playing it, and then in an hour, like, that feeling of disappointment will set in as I realize it's not very good. And Assassin's Creed is another example of, I think, this sort of thing where, like, it's a movie and a game, and the two really don't have anything to do with each other. In fact, I think that the Assassin's Creed series is a particularly excellent comparison with the Sly Cooper trilogy. The thing is that they're actually very, very similar in a lot of ways. The the gameplay is similar. Uh, Even the stories have a lot in common. You're playing as a thief in Sly, and you're playing as an assassin in Assassin's Creed. You climb up things. The thing is that Sly does basically everything better. So here's what I mean. Look at the openings of Sly 3 versus the opening of any Assassin's Creed game among the first three. Assassin's Creed has this absolutely horrible story that takes place in the real world that involves this never-ending battle of assassins and Templars. It always drags. It's incredibly boring. I believe it was Assassin's Creed 3 that started with you in the real world just walking around the facility until you got plugged in, and then you ended up in the other world, and then there was a prologue in the other world until you actually got started with the real gameplay, right?
Yep.
There is so much filler here. Sly 3 starts off in media res. It starts off with you are in the middle of the final heist. There are a bunch of other characters there. You don't know who they are. Something goes wrong. You're attacked by a monster, and then you flash back. There is then a 3-minute cutscene. Honestly, I'm probably overshooting it. It's probably closer to a 1-minute cutscene. There is a 1-minute cutscene where Sly reveals what he's doing. He says, all right, so after the gang broke up, Murray left, Bentley's in a wheelchair, and then I met this guy, McSweeney. He used to run with my dad, and he said that there was a vault where my family kept all of their money, and it was but right now a guy named Dr. M was in control of it. So we have to put together a team in order to take out this vault. And that's what the game will be about. He explains this in about a minute, and then you get started with the first level. This is better in literally every aspect. You actually get playing basically immediately. The necessary backstory is dispensed in a cutscene that is short, to the point, well acted, well animated, and then you get into the main game. Assassin's Creed has probably an hour of build-up before you actually start playing, legitimately playing. It's absurd. And it's terrible. And this is the norm with AAA games. They have no clue how to use a video game to tell a story. They don't know what they're doing. So they play these movies of varying quality. The Last of Us was an example of, admittedly, a pretty good movie alongside a pretty good game, but that didn't really connect. Assassin's Creed is an example of a movie that is not very good being played alongside your game. Megabuster Shepherd says the Virgin Assassin's Creed versus the Chad Prince of Persia. Yeah, Prince of Persia's good.
I consider it a pity that they don't really make good games in that series anymore. I played the one for the PS3, and it was like, ooh, this is okay. But apparently
Sands of Time is great.
Oh, absolutely.
I would say that's the main problem with modern video games. They don't really know how to tell story, in video game storytelling, should be specific. They don't really know how to tell stories as games. Go ahead, Ben.
And it's Japan is doing some good stuff in it. The development of environmental storytelling through Elden Ring and Dark Souls, really kind of push things to the next level for a certain amount of storytelling. But in reality, it's just kind of this weird Skinner box, where you have to search for it so you get the reward, so you have to search more for more rewards. The Subnautica tried to have a story in the second one that was the ice one. That's really just a DLC. And it's about the various things, and the character might be a lesbian or not, who knows, they never actually say. All this other stuff, wherein in reality, Subnautica, the original one, just had alien guns shoot the rescue craft out of the sky. There might be a disease that's affecting you and affecting others. Figure it out, and then you get the cure, and that's it. That's all the story you get. Wolfenstein New Order tried to do a story. but then they ruined it past Old Blood. Um, yeah, I think Old Blood's the one. That was just like the castle DLC thing. Like there are some stories being thrown out there. Like point and click still have some story to them. Hades still has some story for Western stuff. But quite frankly, I think people kind of mistake what the video game is supposed to be. Right now, there's a game I'm playing called Brigador. Not literally right now, I'm playing Vampire Survivors. And the kicker with Brigador is that it has a high score system, which is the amount of pay you earn in a mission. And they have like walled off areas, they have like things you should explode. There's prizes and all that jazz. Big prizes, and all this other stuff. And it sort of comes together in a nice, tight package. But it doesn't really overstay its welcome. The dictator died. Everyone's scrambling for power. Some people want to destroy everything. Some people want to open the planet up to the world, to the universe. Some people just want to be the next great dictator. And it's not even really going for any great detail here. It's just, hey, this is our motivation. We're paying you to do the dirty work, though. We certainly won't betray you down the line. No, no. And so you get through it. Like a game that everyone praises that honestly I kind of dislike is Inscription. So I'm playing Inscription. And it starts you off with this super moody guy in a cabin who murders you every time you fail a run. Alright, it's great, it's fantastic. Ooh, it's moody. Ooh, all the good stuff I want, all my little, Coomer erectus brain needs. But no, like once you leave the cabin, which is a perfectly reasonable thing to do, all of a sudden you actually have to do a deck building game, and you have to think about your deck. The luck goes away, the randomness goes away, you're just playing things, and it's like, okay, this is kind of boring. I no longer want to play it. Another game that came out recently by the developer of Dusk, which I have played on this channel before, is Iron Lung, which he's updated it a bit because it got popular and a lot of people bought it. He's like, why not? I'll make it a little more fun for you. But in the basics, you are a guy welded into an iron tin can, and it's very probable you're not getting out alive. Every planet in existence lost all its life all at once. The only survivors are in decaying space station. We found an ocean of blood on a moon. We're sending you down to figure it out. Like, that's all a video game story needs. That's all it needs. Like, you can do a lot more, like with Hades and stuff like that. But honestly, Hades' story only kind of was my motivation. I found Transistor a bit more compelling. Partially because of that soundtrack.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that the story of Hades was the most compelling thing about it even, but that's the thing. Honestly, though, that's one of the reasons I would consider Hades to be at least very close to a masterpiece, because there are multiple reasons I can imagine somebody wanting to play through Hades. And it's the same with Portal. People would say, I like Portal for the story, but you could easily not care about the story of Portal at all and play for the gameplay, because the gameplay of Portal is so good.
Yep.
Yeah. Same type of idea. Hades is the same way.
Right.
I can imagine somebody not liking Hades' gameplay but playing for the story, or not liking the story and playing for the gameplay, because both of them are extremely high quality.
Yep. And it's something that people...
You're right. Transistor's very good, by the way.
Oh, yeah. And there's more to it that people kind of like want to, have their cake and eat it too. The reason why Bioshock was an absolute masterpiece and why Bioshock 2 is a worthy successor isn't because of some sort of weird magic thing with Ayn Rand and Andrew Ryan and all this other stuff. In reality, Bioshock 2 and 1 and all that stuff, because really they're just kind of one game. The reason why it's a masterpiece is because they understood what parts to focus on the story and what parts to focus on the gameplay. The Sander Cohen area is all gameplay with just a bit of story to explain why you're doing these horrible things and then taking pictures of it. uh, Bioshock Infinite falls apart where the story they try to make is too intense. It can only be written in a video game because it's the only way to visualize what they're talking about. And despite what people complain about, it's a lot simpler than it is. Elizabeth is across all universes. She can do a whole bunch of things, and all universes are basically the same. There are some that where she can jump out farther than others. However, you poor sap, are in one of the basic bitch ones, pardon my language, and you must deal with it. It's implied heavily throughout. The two twins, sorry, the twins talk about it all the time in front of you. Uh, the second you realize it's a multiverse, it just kind of goes through it. Where they tripped up is when they went to Bioshock for more than before the big reveals. There were hints throughout which were pretty good, but then when you get to the weapons part manufacturing area, it kind of starts falling apart because we leave the original universe that we were in, that our main character is in, and jump to one where they got the weapons, and everything is much worse because they fed weapons to communists. It's like one of
Yeah,
those things where,
I
hold on.
despise the story of Bioshock Infinite, and the reason that I hate the story of Bioshock Infinite so much, I mean, there are multiple reasons. Number one, I hate the ultimate message of the story, which is as absolutely and utterly and totally nihilistic as you could possibly get. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's like insultingly nihilistic. I hate the fact that it is clearly, incredibly, openly anti-Christian.
Yep.
Uh, it is not only anti-Christian, it is virulently and violently anti-Christian to the point that I am surprised more people don't talk about that. This is the part where you go like, "Oh no, it's radical Christianity." Like, no,
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 it's
stop.
anti-Christian.
Stop. Stop. Because if it were Judaism, then you would not be making comments like that.
Yep.
Like, don't be ridiculous. It is anti-Christian.
Yep.
You know.
And
Uh
it's the anti-Christian where the guy doesn't even really understand what Christianity is. He's still an attack on it and like American fundamentalism and stuff like that. But it's like he picked up like some toys, a puzzle, and said, "Okay, I know this fits together. I don't know how. I'm just gonna mash it together till it works." Yes, American nationalism is tied to Christianity and evangelicalism. However, nobody really understands how it went by for the day today because nobody cared, right? You went to church on
no.
Sunday, you lived like a Christian, and maybe you had a radical preacher or a preacher was on fire, and maybe you didn't. A lot of people cared a lot about abolition during the pre-Civil War era. That's part of the reason why the Baptists and the Southern Baptists came together on different sides of the aisle. And it's like all these different things that people are talking about, people can't even accept the reality of the lived versions of the slaves themselves. All right, when they tell them how it was for some of them, it's there's no truth to it. There's no truth to how they perceive reality, so they can't represent truth in reality. But the bigger point I was getting to with this is that they lost track of the main storyline and instead
Yeah.
jumped from step to step. They brought it back together in the end, and that's very important. In the end, they did bring it back to what they intended to be. But uh, the second they stopped staying in the main timeline or jumping out of the main timeline and jumping back, they abandoned the main timeline. Like I want to be very clear here. They made choices and they never went back to the original timeline. They lost the plot completely because we know instinctually that they have violated a rule and they have violated a central rule to their game. Anthony, I'm gonna bring us to a close because it is past 8, and I'll let you have your comment.
Fair. So,
Um, Hold on. Let me. Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
okay. I linked you Matthew Matos's Bioshock Infinite critique because I agree with all of it. There are many problems I have with Infinite. I agree with Matthew Megabuster Shepard when he says I'm still sad we didn't get to see the original Infinite. That looked awesome. He is right.
Yep.
Infinite is not a well thought out game. I think that clearly there were production issues, but
Mm-hmm.
like the fact that there are Vitaphones all over the place. In the original Bioshock, it's a bit of a stretch, but it's a justified stretch at least. Like they try to justify it. It makes some sense that people are making audio recordings. Right?
Yep.
In Bioshock Infinite, it does not make any sense, especially because those Vitaphones are comically huge. They are there because they were there in Bioshock, and that is the only reason. Uh, like, that's literally it. The ending of Bioshock Infinite, I absolutely hate. It is nihilistic. It is
Mm-hmm.
scandalous in that way. Ironically, I think that the Burial at Sea Part 2 DLC is the best thing to come out of Infinite, even though I don't think the story is very good. I just think it has the best gameplay of all three. It turns it into a stealth game, and a very good stealth game in my opinion. A fun stealth game. I liked it a lot. Even though the story still doesn't really make sense. Now, does the story make sense, I guess is the question. I mean, the problem is, I'm going to be somewhat fair here, right? More fair than I really want to be. It is a time travel story. Time travel stories, if we're being honest, pretty much never make sense, right? Uh,
Yep.
they're very, very difficult to make sense. They have to follow their own internal logic, and they work, as John C. Wright once put it, like a Mobius strip. You're not supposed to be, the Mobius strip doesn't make sense, but it looks like it makes sense. And they make you believe it makes sense. So I guess the real question is, does Bioshock Infinite accomplish that? I think that the way they do it here's what I'll say, is heinously bad. That it ends with a 20-minute cutscene. That is the exact opposite of using your game to tell your story. That is literally the antithesis. You are wasting the fact that you have a video game by ending on a 20-minute cutscene. Now, I know that Kojima rolls over in his bed right now, sits up and goes, "Am I being called upon?" Uh, but even so, I would say that about Metal Gear as well, to be honest. The one difference that Metal Gear has, however, the one advantage, is that unlike in Metal Gear, you can skip the cutscenes in Metal Gear. You cannot skip the final 20-minute cutscene of Bioshock Infinite. Oh no, you must sit through all of it to be revealed that everything you did was entirely pointless, and you need to die, and your daughter needs to kill you. What a beautiful ending. But don't worry, just to make it make even less sense, you wake up and maybe your daughter is in the other room, and just because Ken Levine hates you, he does not tell you. Uh, why doesn't he tell you? 'Cause he hates you.
Yeah.
That's my answer. He hates you. Uh, so you never know.
In a more, I'm gonna finish this off. In a
Yep.
more mechanical sense, every video game is made up of rules. Doom, all the Dooms have a simple rule: you and the demons are on an even footing. It may not seem like that. It may not seem unfair, but you have the firepower to make those demons pay. It's guaranteed. Even if you kind of run low on ammo, if the developer is a kindly one, the developer levels will say, not the fan made ones. The fan made ones are Sisyphean. Uh, they make sure you have all the ammo you need. If you don't use the ammo well, you can't beat the level unless you're really good with a chainsaw. And considering that this is, 1992, you're not that good with a chainsaw because nobody really knows how to handle chainsaw in games until, ironically, Doom 2016.
Left 4 Dead 2. They use the chainsaw.
Yeah, but I'm talking like a chainsaw, like more than just a good melee weapon. Because,
I get you.
anyway, the reason why we're coming to Bioshock Infinite is because it is the pinnacle of both potential good writing and
Yeah.
actual bad writing. There is no problem with a multiversal story if you can
No.
handle it right. And in a video game, the medium is actually perfect for it. The problem comes in when they violated the rules. I was listening to Shammy's Elden Ring review, which is, a pretty good review. Not as funny as some of his other ones, but it's a very solid review. And he talks about Melania the Blade of Mikola, how I don't know what war Granddaddy was in, and it's a picture of Panzers, maybe the Swiss, because he looks at the cross marks on them. But I do know Patches is circumcised. And it's like, that's the gag. How deep in the lore can you go? How much information in it? But the thing is, the lore depends on it being a fun game. And part of the reason people complain about Melania is because she has a move that's very unfair. In fact, it gets to the point where you basically have to cheat her AI in a way that breaks immersion to really avoid all of it. And you can, of course, get good and all that jazz, but it breaks a rule that there's a certain amount of fairness within Elden Ring. It's hard, it wants to kill you, it wants you to stop, and all this jazz, but it'll never give you a challenge that you can't meet, that you can't meet halfway. You can get summons, you can get magic, whatever, but you can do it. When Elden Ring breaks the rules with the last battle, Melania, and a couple others, it does so in a way that forces you to either get frustrated and wait for a good roll on the AI checks, or, to rise above it in a way that the game does not intend you to do it from the beginning. In that same way, Bioshock Infinite violated its own rules in ways I described earlier, but then proceeded to take away a lot of the player's agency, not just with a 20-minute cutscene, but with the inability to use the full multiverse in a way that matters. Ultimately, if they killed the main character, I forget his name these
Booker.
days, Booker, thank you. If they killed Booker and he, quote unquote, wakes up in the moment before he gave Elizabeth to the Lucrezi twins, they had an opportunity to say, to have him pick her up and then look over at the door where there's a knock. And he would have an opportunity to run with her out into, out the back door. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it would violate causality enough that the Lucrezi twins, or at least the male one, I think, would disappear. Comstock would disappear. It would literally just be like, huh, well, and then, Lucrezi herself just goes, like they could actually switch it off to her perspective where she returns to her lab, only to discover all her stuff doesn't work anymore. This may be shocking to say, but an ending like that, where Booker makes a better choice and the multiverse is destroyed, quote unquote destroyed, would make a perfectly good ending for that game and elevate it to true mastery, even with everything else before it unchanged. The explicit in this case would be better than the implicit. We don't know whether Booker would make a better decision or if he's a slave of fate. The problem is that they have implied several times throughout that game that being a slave of fate is the normal for mankind. You are a slave to the multiverse of fate. Him defying it in the last seconds, or even giving a player the choice, do you give Elizabeth to the twins, or do you keep her for yourself and run out the back door, would be a perfectly good ending. But they didn't do it. And I'm sure that Ken Levine hates the fact that he's the Bioshock guy. He hasn't made a game since the last Bioshock Infinite DLC. or at least a game that matters. So it's clear he's burnt out as a creator, because it's been like 7 years or something ridiculous like that. And
Yes.
it's a sobering lesson. Ultimately, if, like, let's say I have an ending for Pinkerton's Ghosts where Jack Morrow dies to his father, that's an evil ending. It is a wicked ending. I would be insulting my muse, God, and all the other things I blame my writing talent for. Uh, because it's an insult to everything that's come before. The reason why I don't shy away from the fact that Jack Morrow's destined to kill his father is because that's the only ending that's good. It is the only worthwhile ending. That evil is repaid with justice. Not evil for evil, not evil for good, but evil with justice. In this life and the next. And that was the subject of my latest Pinkerton's Ghost episode, which is going up on Subscribe Stars soon. I want to thank you all for joining. If you do have some favorite video games, please put them in the comments and we can discuss them at a later date. And just kind of see what goes on with them and how you like it. Like we said, next couple weeks we are out and about. We will have something in 2 Saturdays that I hope you enjoy. Thank you guys for coming in. And I hope you join us when we return from our vacation, well rested, well sunned, glowing, moisturized, living our best life now. Goodbye.